First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today, we're going to be discussing problematic or difficult employees. So basically, the perspective for today is going to be supervisors who have to deal with difficult employees or problematic employees. Then on a later date, we'll do it from the other perspective. We'll do it from employees that have difficult bosses. And we all know who's sitting there to my left, Russ Hamilton. Russ, you ready for today?
Oh, let's mash it up, man. I'm ready.
This is going to be a very interesting topic because I actually posted it up on our Facebook pages, on the YouTube channel, and we got some very interesting comments. When we come back from our sponsors, we're going to dive into this. We're going to talk about what we feel may make someone a difficult employee and maybe some common ways to address these concerns, because obviously I feel there a list of infinite reasons why someone could be a problematic employee, but I believe the way you can address them may have some commonalities. So when we get back from our sponsors, we're going to dive right into difficult employees. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talks for you brave men and women that work that front line. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. That bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. I stand by for our sponsor.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, we're back. All right, Russ, this is going to be a very good topic because, first off, this is something that you can actually relate to firsthand because you were a supervisor, a sergeant for the CDCR for around 7-8 years?
Yes, I was indeed.
Okay, so I'm sure that you had your fair share of those difficult employees, correct?
Yeah, I bumped heads with a number of oppositional personality types.
Now, I like the fact that you used the word oppositional because I recently just took a class on this. I thought the class was phenomenal. And right at the very beginning, the instructor wanted to get our opinion of what we thought made a difficult employee. And the list, in my opinion, could have been infinite. I mean, you know, we had everything from people that aren't motivated, disgruntled, dead-end employees, jealous employees, people that are looking for that lawsuit. I mean, the list goes on. Russ, in your opinion, you know, from your experience, what makes a problem employee? What are some of the qualities?
You know, there's so many different things. Like I said, you know, you have this endless laundry list. But of course, you have the ones that just their default position is whatever is in opposition to your wants and desires. And sometimes those are really the worst because no matter which way you pull, they're going to pull back the opposite way.
Right, and that's that resistance. And I felt that when we had this dialogue in this class that, believe it or not, there were some commonalities that could be used to address each of these problematic concerns, if you will. So, as again, we named some of those concerns. Now, moving forward, how would you address people that were unmotivated, resistant, people, again, that were jealous for your position? So we kind of ran over some scenarios, and then we noticed that one of the key concerns that we needed to address first was communication seemed to be the root of all these concerns. Like basically a way to address it would be better communication, or at least a chance for both parties to understand each other's perspective. So again, as a supervisor, Russ, how important is communication with your subordinates?
Well, communication is going to be, is really, of course, key. But sometimes you really have to break things down into exactly how you're going to communicate with this problem employee, because there's so many different avenues that you can take. You know, it can be anything from one-on-one dialogue to diluting the problem by trying to deal with that individual in a group or team setting. Instead of giving them a chance to be oppositional only to you, you give a chance for the rest of the team to take a little bit of that fire out of them.
Now, obviously, the reason why we're having this dialogue is we automatically know people are always quick to go to the paper and pen without really understanding what the concern is. And I think that when you're quick to write the discipline, again, depending on what it is, we're not talking about extreme things. We're talking about maybe things that could be addressed through communication. You're still not solving the issue. It's just going to further that divide. So I do believe there should be something that attacks the core value of that individual just to see where they're coming from. Again, if you have to get to that point where discipline is needed, do the discipline. But this is an effort to try to see if there's a way to solve it without going right to that discipline. I like what Russ just said about either dealing with them on an individual level or on a group level. And here's the funny thing. There was an interesting story, and Russ, let me get your opinion on this story. And guys, feel free to comment your opinion on this. But let's say as a supervisor, you had an issue with an employee because both of you guys had competed for the same position and you got the job and they did it. And now you're directly supervising that individual and you feel that the individual is a little resistant to you because you took the position from them in their mind. And also rumors are going around that he's kind of bad-mouthing you being in that position. How would you address that concern?
The first thing that I would try and do is I would try and assess what the totality of that is. If he's doing everything that he can to undermine you and badmouth you, and it's going to impact, what's happening in your unit and stuff, that's something that you probably have to address right away. If it's something that's more general and it's just, now and then and they're just blowing off steam, I feel like I'm a big man. I can let that ride for a while or whatever. I don't have to attack it right away. I think that the thing that I would want to do for myself though is I would want to ask myself what a good supervisor would do. And when you bring up the aspect of paperwork and such, a really truly good supervisor, a good leader, is going to be able to shepherd that person back onto the path of the straight and narrow. If you put paperwork on them, and you may have to, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but once you put paperwork on them, the chances of you being able to positively impact them may not exist anymore. It may, if the person is coachable, teachable, and to a degree has a fairly professional outlook on things, that may not hurt. But if you're just going in there and you think that the way is just to hit them with paperwork, and then they may be forever done with you. I think that a real true leader, a real true good supervisor, tries to shepherd them in some other way first, if possible.
Right, and I do like the fact that we're looking to address it because two other problematic employees. One is one that's toxic, which I think that this winds up becoming. If you get this employee who is disgruntled over the loss of the position, and now you're directly supervising them, and they lost the position to you, the last thing we want them to do is to kind of spread that negativity to their peers. And when we were discussing it in class, what we thought for this employee is if for some reason, we'll try to be constructive, try to make him see it's a team effort, try to bring value to what he brings to the table, make sure that he knows he's appreciated or she knows they're appreciated, running the whole gamut. But if it gets to the point where none of that's working, there could get to a point where at least you have the respect of his peers. So, he turns out to be the minority, and those peers have an influence on turning that individual around. And I've seen that happen. I've been promoted up. There could have been some jealousy at one point, and then again, through my actions and through time, I was able to turn most people around. But the problem was always that employee who went for the position when I didn't get it. And the barrier really wasn't my leadership style. It really wasn't how I conducted myself. The barrier was always there. It was going to be, I got the position and he didn't. But the funny thing is, though, with this was I never felt the need to explain that to him. I don't think that's correct. Some people may approach that employee and say, hey, listen, you know, I didn't just give myself this position. You know, I got the position. I worked hard just like you worked hard. I don't see that you need to explain yourself at that level. I think the key is if this person doesn't want to turn around, then you start looking at the peers, and eventually the peers will start to influence the individual, or worse comes to worse, and this is sad too, the individual becomes isolated, and that's a whole other different concern. But how do you feel about when you have that resistance working with the peers to maybe influence the one?
Oh yeah, that's. I think that's an often overlooked technique. In that sometimes every interaction that you're going to have with a particular individual is going to be toxic and not going to be very productive. So when you take that person and you put them in the group setting, or better yet, what I call the team setting, you know, where they're a part of the team and they're going to have to function with those other individuals, it dilutes that toxicity, and hopefully it does. If they're really that toxic and they start getting other people onto their side, that's a whole other subject. But you put them in a situation where teamwork is key, and let them have some autonomy to operate and get the job that they're supposed to be doing done. That can be very beneficial, very therapeutic toward moving beyond that toxic line that you two have been stuck on there.
Right. Now, remember, guys, the problem in corrections is we don't want to isolate our employees. We don't want anybody feeling that they're alone. That's why the other person I was going to mention, remember I said too, was a loner. In our profession, if we have someone that's on the outside, the inmates jump on that. So even though we may have a problematic employee, and we covered this before, we cannot move away from them. Actually, we need to do the harder thing, the opposite of that. We need to try to bring them back in, because that's what they want. So this dialogue is actually very needed, because most people think, well, I have a problematic employee, you know, I'll just work around them. And that's sad to say, but it's true. Even the peers may do that. In our profession, we cannot do that. If we do that, that makes that individual vulnerable, which ultimately will make our safety, the facility safety, everything becomes vulnerable. So these conversations are good to have, because the automatic response is not the response that we need to commit ourselves to. So again, we have somebody spreading negativity, you know, and here we are as a supervisor, we have to make the effort to bring about some form of peace. And again, it's the approach, it's the communication. But I will say one thing. As I'm discussing this, there is another employee that I find also to be very problematic. And this is going to be also advice to those that are supervisors as well. The person that doesn't have the ability to self-reflect. And what I mean by that is, as me being a supervisor, I think key is communication. I think people need to understand what it is that I want done. And sometimes I have to, you know, rethink how I asked that, you know, how was I seen by that individual? And the same thing can go to obviously an employee when they're receiving the order, or when they're asked to do something that they may not want to do. But when you have people that don't have the ability to self-reflect and look inwards, those could be very, very problematic employees that is going to be very hard for us to address. And I'm going to ask you guys in the comments below, do you ever self-reflect? Or you always think that you're right? Is there ever a chance that, you know, you may take a step back and say, wait, maybe I should approach this in a different manner? Because Russ, I'm sure in your time, Russ, the way you treat one employee may be totally different than you treat another employee, because there's different personalities.
Oh yeah, you know, and that just goes to say that, you know, you can't, there's no one size fits all solution for, you know, any particular problem. There are employees that are gonna be receptive to your suggestions, to your orders, to your directives that you're giving them to fix themselves. And then there are going to be those that are going to be, you know, defiant and oppositional, and aren't and are going to do exactly the opposite of what you want them to do. So, you know, it's a thing where you have to custom and tailor fit to try and, you know, get the best possible optimum outcome for each of those employees. Now, you know, there's some that are probably redeemable and salvageable, and then there's probably some that aren't. And maybe they might need to go see another supervisor and work in a different area, especially if you don't have the answer for it.
Right. And, you know, if you notice, guys, besides communication, another commonality that we've been also discussing is the teamwork. You know, having people feel that they're part of a team, that we work together, and that we're responsible for the outcome. So basically, I think even when you have employees that have lost their motivation to work or may have been just kind of feel dead-ended, they just don't want to go anywhere, I think the best way to get to them is to give them a sense of responsibility over what their job is. Don't try to micromanage them, because that's going to further divide. Give them a sense of responsibility and show them that they're part of a team. And at the end of the day, win or lose, the team does it together. And Russ, you stressed that right before, but the importance of teamwork, the importance of responsibility, that's got to have a good connection with that problematic employee. I'm sure, like, if you give that problematic employee some level of responsibility over the work that they're doing, or some effort that we're part of a team, you know, so basically, yeah, I know I'm the supervisor, I know I'm the head of the team, but technically, if you have a good running team, you don't have to play supervisor every day. You know, the team runs automatic, but you feel like a level of responsibility and remind the individual that they're part of a team, win or lose, we all take this together, can also maybe empower the employee and maybe find that hidden motivation.
Well, yeah, you know, sometimes the way that you can attack that is through pairing. And so when you're carrying out whatever your teamwork mission is or whatever, you know, usually you've got that go-to officer that, you know, you're constantly bugging, you know, because he always comes through for you and stuff, you know. Sometimes you can take that problematic employee and put them together, and that officer will do a lot being able to straighten him out, because, you know, now he's in the presence of leadership, you know, and that leadership, even though it's not in a rank structure, it's on a lateral, you know, it's an even one. Sometimes they respond much better to that, because sometimes people will have just a simple problem with authority alone. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can carve it up. So pairing is one way that you can, you know, attack that and hopefully start to make it, you know, better, to make it more right.
Right, and I'm going to tell you something, Ross. I really do believe teamwork really does carry its weight among anybody that works in this profession, because one thing about our profession in corrections is there are two groups, if you will. I'm not going to say it's an us versus them mentality, but if you're not on our team, it's another team that's going to take you. You know, so we have to embrace that. We have to chase after that. You know, we want you with us, and we definitely don't want you alone. And when we talked about being toxic at the work environment, you know what is a problematic employee that I have zero tolerance for, Russ? An employee that likes to gossip. Have you ever had those employees that like to gossip and then wind up just destroying the employee morale? I mean, just wind up giving out too much information and people that don't need that information. Have you ever dealt with gossipers?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, just the fact that we work in corrections is just another term for talkative, you know. So it really can be. I mean, it can be very corrosive to the entire environment, you know. I would rather have someone, and I think we've all been guilty of it one time or another, but I would rather, you know, wait and sit on a little nugget of information and maybe never share it again, than, you know, go spread it around, because, you know, by the time it gets, you know, 2, 3, 4 links down, it's unrecognizable.
Right.
So and then that just makes things even worse. And then the rumor mill just takes over, and then things become unmanageable, and they become unmanageable between different groups, between management and admin and supervisory and line staff, and all that friction really isn't worth it. That friction is something we seek to overcome. We try and find enough common ground to serve as a lubricant to keep us all hopefully working together in some fashion or another without friction.
And I like what you're mentioning, because even though people may think this is just locker room banter, first off, we're in a professional working environment. That's one thing. Second thing is that gossiping, it's very divisive by nature. It really is. We need to be as one. We need to be as one. And gossiping is one of the things in this profession that will divide your forces. Russ, I know you've seen it. I've seen it. So for those that gossip, I don't know if it's something that you could just automatically stop doing, because I think it's also in some cases, a personality quirk, because I think people kind of get their kicks out of, sharing personal, intimate details about somebody. And I don't know what it's for. Maybe it's because you feel you have that sense of knowledge, or you have that power because you have that knowledge, or you just like to stir up stuff. But gossiping literally has no room in corrections. It has no room in the professional environment that corrections is. And again, it destroys morale and it divides the team. Correct, Russ?
Yeah, and if we're going to gossip, let's go ahead and gossip and say positive things, about each other behind each other's back. Do that, I mean, you don't see enough of that. This is one of the most dangerous, dirty, and thankless jobs that you can have. Now, that's not to say I don't like it, and I don't identify, and I don't not identify myself with the job itself, because I'm very much oriented toward it. But the thing is that more recognition, there's nothing wrong with that. It's nice, if you're a peer, say something good about someone behind their back. It'll get back to them.
Oh, all the time, especially because you're not the only one that gossips. There's other people that are going to gossip, and whatever you tell them, trust me, if they're listening to it, most likely they gossip as well. I used to try to avoid gossipers, because the concern here is that when you're at that table and you're discussing stuff that's on a personal level about somebody else, you all become responsible for that outcome, no matter who's talking. It's the truth. So next thing you know, Gangi was at that table too, and so was Russ. And again, if you're gossiping, hey, you know what, man? You can keep that for you. I'm going to go ahead and sit at the other table. And what's funny, as we're going through all this, little problematic employees, I used to hate dealing with the know-it-alls. As a supervisor, you may get that sometimes with your employees, but I found a very good way to handle know-it-alls. Now, Russ, I'm sure you dealt with know-it-alls in your career, correct? On all levels.
All levels.
Right. So, I mean, I'm sure we even get the bosses out there, and we'll have that discussion on a later day, that just don't respect their front line and think they know everything. And we'll get to that. But right now we're focused on today's conversation is with the employee and the supervisor having to deal with the problematic employee. You know what's funny, how I realized how to deal with know-it-alls? I used to teach. I used to go out and work with a guy named Dale Solers. He used to, I used to work for him. We used to teach a class about interview and interrogation, about body language and stuff like that. And I worked with him for a little over a year and change. Great guy. Has a book out in the market called Identifying Deceptive Behavior. And that was actually the name of the course. And two things when I was teaching with him was, once I also partnered with his course. So I taught his course. So yes, I am trained in interview and interrogation, body languages and whatnot. And we taught for some high-level government officials. His class was very well recognized and was honor working for him. But I also taught gangs as well for him. It was kind of, we partnered up on a couple of courses. But he taught me how to deal with hecklers. Now, when we were doing the class, you would have people that would ask questions, but you know that they're just asking questions because they either want to trap you or they want to sound smarter than you are. So it's like they don't even listen to what you have to say. They're just focusing on questions to throw you off your game. And it's sad, you know, and again, you know, I wasn't one to always teach off the PowerPoint, so you could ask me questions. You know, if I didn't know, I would jump out and get the answers. So I was okay with these questions, but I knew that there were some that were just looking to zing, just to get you. So his way of teaching this actually works with know-it-alls at the job place. I know we have them, was to actually, instead of challenging them, recognize them without challenging them, and then eventually they come around, because most of the time it's a lot of hot air. Sometimes they're right in what they say. If they're right in what they say, there's no problem with recognizing it. There's no problem being humble and saying, hey, you know what, you're correct about that. Thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that. You know what, next time when I do my course, I'm going to make sure to mention that. You kind of acknowledge what they're given, give them a little recognition, and sometimes they embrace that and they never bother you again for the rest of the course. I think the same thing could play out here when you have those know-it-all employees that no matter what you do, they're like, well, you should have did it this way. You should have did it this way. Once you start acknowledging them, once you start recognizing it, especially if they're right, that's the key here. If they're wrong, obviously it's a different ballgame. But if they're right, we don't want to contest that just because it's personal. If they're right, I have no problem as a supervisor saying, hey, Russ, thanks for what you told me yesterday. You know, that was great advice. I'm going to probably start doing that from now on. Russ, and I know in your career you've dealt with those know-it-alls, right? How would you address them?
The know-it-all situation, you know, it takes a couple different paths. Some guys, especially the ones that are truly knowledgeable, you know, they're knowledgeable, but they're oppositional in their knowledge. They're not trying to help you with that knowledge. They're trying to hinder you. The other ones are just throwing up a smoke screen because either it's entertaining for them, or they're just hoping to run out the clock so that they have to do the least amount of work that's possible. So those are the two possible ones. Now, the ones that are actually knowledgeable, they're actually, but they're trying to do it from an oppositional viewpoint. They're easy to deal with, because then what you do is you just hang a whole hell of a lot of responsibility on them. Well, good. Well, you know about that. You know about this particular gang or whatever it is. Good. I'm going to have you go down there and find all of the tattoos and write all of the documentation on these guys. You know. And so they'll stop doing that if you hang too much on them, or they'll get to where they like it. Either way, it's a win-win.
Right. But let me ask you a question, because obviously there's never we're dealing with personalities, so there's never always going to be that one size fits all, like you said. But what do you feel about what I mentioned too? Because I actually agree with you on that point. I like that, because you mentioned it's oppositional, right? So I feel that the way you're reacting to that is also kind of feeding off the opposition, correct? Like, okay, well, if you're saying this and I'm kind of feeling that it's oppositional, fine. Here's the responsibility. Get the work done. Now, but what about the other approach I mentioned? What's your thoughts on maybe just for once recognizing the individual and then trying to just kind of smooth the bridge? Is that possible, or you think not? No.
Oh, no, I think it is. And I think what you do is, I think you try and use a little bit of each piece of the recipe depending on, you know, how much more sweetener you have to add, or how much more, you know, puffed up flour. You know, you just got to kind of tailor make it. And so giving them a little bit of recognition, yeah, that's definitely something. I don't remember doing that too much, but I can see how it would have a good effect.
Well, again, I learned it when I was doing the teaching, and it was always try to keep things positive, because again, I am going to be working with these individuals. So, you know, it's an attempt to keep things positive, but I could definitely see, here's the funny thing, how we learn every day from each other. If that approach didn't work, I like what you just said. Then you know what? I'm going to be a little bit passive aggressive then, you know, and this is what it is. So I like the fact that we brought about a bit of a balance here, because we have the two different approaches, but both make sense, because I think it is an attempt to pretty much just slow down on what you think you know. You know what I mean? Slow it down. And, you know, I like both approaches. I also, you know what's another problematic employee too that we're thinking about it? The one that's retired, but he's still got a few years left.
Yeah, he just hasn't turned his notice in yet, but he doesn't always turn up.
Now, obviously, those are kind of tough to deal with because they can encompass a lot of the other concerns that we already mentioned. Because when you get close to that retirement, some people are motivated to get that position, you know, because they may want to make more of a pension. But a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are like, hey, dude, you know what? I got a couple years left. I'm just going to coast. And then you as a new supervisor dealing with someone that's kind of, again, has their or has their foot out the door, which technically not yet. Like until that last day, you're still working at this facility, getting them motivated to step up and do what's expected of them. Like I'm sure in your career, you've had people that were closer to the end of their time and you could see their work ethic. Some cases have changed. Some cases, no. I've seen people work to that last day. I mean, to the point where you didn't even know they were retiring. It's like, whoa, he just retired? Wow, he just did 7 breaks and all this other stuff, you know, but you get those that are like, yeah, I'm retiring in like 3 years. So, you know, this is my takedown time, you know, and as a supervisor, that could become very frustrating because you have to deal with that individual. And I'm telling you something, whether you got three years left, I know I'm sorry, but if there's work that's got to get done, you got to do the work. Russ, Russ, you retired, man. How were you towards the end of your career?
Well, I can tell you a couple stories about any of my 3 retirements. My first retirement, I got into it was my very last week. I got into a scrap with an inmate and I got hurt. I mean, it wasn't anything terrible, but I had to limp for a week. So I wasn't shrugging anything then. The second time I retired after I came back from being a sergeant, I was a officer again, part-time. My very last day, I found a shank. Wow. Because I went out there and hustled and found it. And then my third one actually passed relatively without too much fanfare. So, but you know, I was always in there until the end.
Let me ask you a question. I don't know if this counts as a problematic employee, so I'm going to have you answer this, Russ. The company person, the company man, the person that kind of kisses the boss's ass, if you will. Do you see them as being problematic, especially if it's your ass that they're kissing? Well,
the problem with the ass kissing is that it's toxic in a different way, you know. And it's like a toxicity that you know, slowly spreads around, and it makes everyone else bitter. And they're bitter at 2 people. They're bitter at the ass kisser, and they're bitter at the ass kissee. So you know, it's its own thing, and you just got to try and, you know, remove yourself from that person, you know, and. You know, but I mean, everyone likes their ass kissed, so.
Well, you know what's funny? The reason why I wasn't a big fan of those that did that, because there were some in my career, is, well, let's just do it this way. I want to be consistent with how I treat all my employees. That's key to me. Again, how we relate to each other is one thing. We talked about, you know, we have to address people maybe differently, but at the end of the day, you are looking for that consistency. When you add those employees, and again, that kissed your ass a little bit, that went above and beyond, like this is hard because it's that fence. I mean, I love when people go above and beyond. I'm not saying that. But I'm talking about above and beyond and beyond and beyond just because they want to gain favor with you. And that's their sole reason. You know, my concern is I don't want to be put as a supervisor where I'm obligated to that individual. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to make that obligation make me treat anybody else less than I'm treating this individual. And trust me, it comes out. You know, if I got this employee that's, you know, above and beyond, constantly kissing my ass, whatever it is, the thing is, it makes me feel compelled to give them a little something more. And then, like you mentioned, the peers start to see it. And now the peers start thinking that you're favoring that employee. And I would want to say, well, they work above and beyond, but technically, it's a different type of above and beyond. It's hard for me to explain it because I do want people to work above and beyond. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it's why you're doing it. You're working above and beyond because that's what you're supposed to be doing, and that's fine. You want to keep the facility safe, that's fine. But if you're only working above and beyond to gain favor with the supervisor, you know, to maybe manipulate them into doing something for you that they wouldn't do for others, that's where I have a problem with it. And as a supervisor, I don't want to put myself into a position where I'm treating them better than I'm treating anybody else. Does that make sense, Russ? Am I coming across clearly?
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, that makes perfect sense. And that you're just, you know, you're aware of what those actions do to erode everything. It erodes your authority if other people are getting bitter, you know. So I mean, it's the whole thing about supervision. I mean, it really is. It's a big juggling act, except that none of the objects that you're juggling are the same, and they're all on different arcs and trajectories and everything else. At the end of the day, you're just spent.
Now, guys, we had to do a few episodes before we're losing connection with the computer at one point. So I don't know if it was this episode we did it, but I have a feeling we didn't. I think it was on one of the ones we had to delete because we had problems with the computer. But did we at all mention self-reflection in this one?
I don't think it was on this one. But I think it was on the first one that we tried to get done.
Okay, so if guys, by chance we mention it twice, bear with me because again we did a few of these and I'm kind of forgot what we discussed. But it's very important that we discuss self-reflection because it kind of deals with our positions as supervisors, but also our subordinates. So basically, we have to have the ability to look inwards to see ourselves and understand how we're carrying ourselves. Right now, with the technology that we have, we do a lot of stuff through emails and text messages. And the problem is people can kind of make their own context to that when you give a message. So we've kind of lost the human side of things, you know, how we approach somebody, our mannerisms. That's gone now because we're so used to emailing people. So like if there's someone that doesn't like you for whatever reason, when they read your emails, or they read your texts, whatever the case may be, but we're talking about work, so emails, they can interpret it subjectively a lot differently than what you've put it out. So I would encourage to understand how you carry yourself, one thing, you know, your mannerisms, how you communicate, and really look for, as much as you can, human interaction with your employees. Don't go always, you know, obviously you can always follow up with emails if you want, but try to get those initial conversations with your employees. Let them know that you exist. Build some sense of dialogue with them because I'm telling you something. Right now, I see people that argue over superficial stuff because there's a bias against each other. You know, if I have a bias against you and you bump into me, and even though it was accidental as you assaulted me, you know, it's just, and that comes across in the emails too, how we subjectively interpret those emails. So what I'm trying to say is just make sure that you're aware of how you carry yourself. But again, that goes for the employee. You know, these employees that are not able to self-reflect, are not able to look inward at themselves, those are very dangerous employees for us because it's going to be very hard for us to get at them and turn them around because, unfortunately, they're not willing to look into what their concerns are. And Russ, I'm sure you've dealt with those employees who just don't have the ability to self-reflect.
Yeah, and the ones that don't have the ability to self-reflect usually don't have the ability to fix themselves either. And that's the problem, because in order to fix yourself, you have to recognize what's wrong. I would not sit here and tell you that at all times I've been the perfect employee for all of my bosses over the years. You know, I've had my moments of oppositional defiance, my moments of where, you know, we had some people that we bitterly locked horns and stuff. I think I'm good with most of those people now today after all this. At some point, either they fixed themselves or I fixed myself, though. And that's and that's the ability to, look and see, what can I do to fix this? What if you're totally right in what you feel about this individual? Is there still something you need to fix? Well, maybe there is. Don't always assume that because you're right, you're not wrong.
I like that. And actually, a conversation like this can go on for days because there's so many concerns that we could bring about. And again, it was more of trying to find certain commonalities to deal with it. But nothing's ever going to be 100%. I mean, you think you have one employee turning back and all of a sudden they just, stop coming to work. They just, you think you're getting to them and you're not. But at the end of the day, conversations like this happen because I'm trying to remind people, unless need be, that dealing with a difficult employee, unless it's necessary, may not always be about putting that person on paper, at least initially. And again, depending on what it is, we're not talking about extreme circumstances. We're talking about stuff that's more of maybe a potential personality conflict or some form of passive resistance, or I like what you said with the oppositional perspective. But at the end of the day, the reason why we have these dialogues is because right now, the way we have it, we do have a big divide from management and subordinates. That's because one party feels that they're not being heard, and sometimes the other party, who's probably not listening, goes quick to write these employees up without trying to understand their perspective. And ultimately, I think that's one of the universal commonalities here, is understanding the perspective of both parties. So sometimes a problematic employee doesn't understand the perspective of management when something has to happen. And sometimes management may not understand the perspective of the employee when they have to initiate something. So the thing is there is an effort to bring that communication together so we not only understand each other's perspective, but ultimately build respect for each other's perspective. And again, another commonality is respect. If you're not given respect, you can't get respect. Correct, Russ?
Absolutely. Sometimes it may even hurt to have to give it, depending on the person that you're talking to. But it's something that you may need to do in order to get past a certain, point, that sticking point.
And you know what, Russ? When we did this dialogue today, because we'll start bringing it down to a close, this is just to start the conversation. I feel that this is a topic that we can cover again and again, because I feel that each person is going to have their different method of how they handle things. I mean, just when we talked about the one issue before about the know-it-alls, I had one perspective, you had one perspective, but if you saw what happened there was a balance for us. Maybe my perspective would have been a good initial approach. Russ's perspective would have been a good, the initial approach didn't work. I'm going to do it this way. But either way, both perspectives were before the final approach, which would have been, I'm going to find a way to write this person up. Because that's when it becomes personal. If we're dealing with problematic employees and difficult employees, the tough thing about our profession, as I mentioned before, is that we can't push them away. We have to bring them in. So whatever effort we do, there should be that initial attempt to try to bring that person back to the team. And again, outside of extremes, I'm going to keep on saying that. We're not talking about extreme problems. We're talking about personality conflicts. There has to be an attempt to bring that person back to the team. We are not in a position in corrections to push that person away, because if we push them away, who's on the other side waiting for them? And now the problem is now we've put ourselves in a very, very, very bad position. So dialogue like this is great, because if you notice what we're saying to solve the concerns, they're efforts to bring the person back in. We're no way saying initially that you're going to push the person away. We no way said, okay, well, as soon as this person does this, well, we're going to highlight that we control this, that we run things, and this is what you're going to do, and this is how you're going to get it done. That may not be the right answer. Because you know what? Believe it or not, yeah, we're in a supervisor position, and we always have that. At the end of the day, if this communication doesn't work, then on the back burner, what do I have? I'm your supervisor. You have to listen to me, because if it's an ethical order and I'm telling you what to do, I have the option. If you don't want to listen to me, I'll write you up for insubordination. It's that simple. But it really isn't that simple. Because if that's your only outlet, then eventually that supervisor is going to come in one day and he's going to have nobody, or she's going to have nobody willing to work for them. You can't lead without people that are willing to follow. So we have this discussion here in an attempt to show you that we don't want to always quickly put things on paper without understanding the reasons why. And again, specific, because a lot of times we have general concerns that people try to compare and contrast. That's why when we write somebody up, or if we decide not to write somebody up, we have to be specific as to why or why not. Because if we're not, our actions with that individual gets compared to actions that we may take with somebody else. You know, so you have to be careful of the precedents that you take as well. It's a very fine line. But Russ, I mean, before we get to closing, there is one last question as I'm thinking right now is, when we're trying to make an effort to deal with a problematic employee, we may take certain steps that I'm not going to say are, they're in an effort, let's just put it this way, they're in an effort to bring the person where they need to be. Now, how you deal with that employee may be slightly different, but again, there's specific reasons why you're taking a different route. But how many times have you heard people say, well, you did this for him, you should automatically do that for me, because they're trying to generalize the concern as opposed to understand the specifics of why this one action was warranted, you know, over why it's different for you, why I'm making a different approach. Have you ever dealt with that, like someone that tries to generalize a specific response to something that you did?
Yeah, you know, that's what that is that's usually a response to try and justify their continued opposition after the point at which they've been confronted.
Right.
You know? And so, and it's because they're unwilling to acknowledge that what they did is wrong, or that their outlook is wrong, or whatever. And so that's another one of those, you know, sticking points and stuff that's hard to get beyond. Sometimes you can wrangle a little something out of them through, you know, some sheer logic and discussing it. Sometimes you can't.
And as I said, guys, this is always going to be an effort to bring us together as one, not to separate. So I wish that when supervisors address concerns that we could only be addressing that one individual, but the actions that we take could have a ripple effect, you know, and without people understanding the specifics of why that action was taken, because again, each action we take has a consequence, whether negative or positive. Some people like to generalize the consequence, but sometimes you have cases that are really specific. All because one person got written up and another person didn't, doesn't mean that it was unfair. Maybe the context of the situation was different. Or, you know, I'll give you another example, guys, real quick. You deal with, we're talking about problematic employees. Sometimes you have employees that go through a life change. They're great employees, but then something happens in their life and they tend to start going downhill. By the way, they also become very vulnerable to games that inmates play. And we have to be aware of that as supervisors. You know, we got someone that's always been on top of their game, and then all of a sudden, you know, and we know our guys, all of a sudden, or we know our females, and all of a sudden they start to change. Well, we as supervisors should be aware of that, you know, and we may not be quick to write that individual, let's say because maybe they messed up on an assignment. We may not be quick to write that individual because, having said that, they have a work history that they never had a concern with. So my thing is, you may get that problematic employee who gets written up for the same thing, but again, this employee's been a constant problem. So the first thing they do, instead of stepping up and taking the hit, is compare themselves to someone who's not going to take the hit. And then we're sitting there, generally speaking, yeah, you're right, I wrote you up and I didn't write him up. But specifically speaking now, look at his work history, look at yours. This guy only messed up once, you messed up 20 times. And I feel at this point, the punishment does fit the crime because it's in the context of what, you know, your history, your work history. So sometimes we feel is generalized, is not. There's reasons for the decisions that we make. And again, I feel that, you know, it's the quality of the mistake, if you will. You could deal with another employee that makes a mistake. Let's say his mistake is made in good intent. Should I hold that employee in a negative standpoint, just like I would hold someone else who, let's say, ruined their career by having sex with an inmate, even though both, let's say, could have been removable offenses? You know, because maybe the one guy's good intent, he breached safety and security. You know, we talked about an issue where he opened up the cell door and tried to save an inmate's life because he thought the inmate was hanging themselves, but he broke away from policy and procedure. Should I hold that person up to the same light as I hold the dirty officer up? Because at the end of the day, we have to start realizing that, yeah, you know, the punishments may all be the same. It's sad to say. But at the end of the day, there are specific concerns to each punishment. And all because I didn't write up this individual doesn't mean you're not going to get written up. I hate those problematic employees that just have that history of just getting written up and they look to get out of it by trying to compare your actions to someone that's similar. And again, not showing favoritism. I'm just talking about a way I can justify it, the two work histories. And again, that's being very objective. I'm not favoring one employee over the other. I pulled out both work histories. You have 20 write-ups in the last 2 years. He's had just this one in the course of his 25-year career. What do you think about that, Russ?
Yeah, you know, it's a valid point. Getting someone else to recognize the validity of that point, though, is the hard thing.
Well, that's why we have dialogue like this. You know, we have dialogue like this because, again, what we say is never 100% correct, but my management style, I do lean towards that. I lean towards the history and the context of the situation, you know, and when I go to justify my arguments, I bring that up because that's what's going to make me safely say, yeah, that's why you got written up and that's why he didn't. You know, I know we have same incidents or whatever it is, but if you have someone that just has a history of or just habitual in it, I'm not going to treat them the same way I treat someone else who just may have been involved in that one incident. Again, we're not talking about nothing extreme, things that we can handle in-house as management. But, hey, Russ, anything you want to say in closing?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to one thing you said about self-reflection because I think it's an excellent point. But using self-reflection as a supervisor, reflect on what you want for that particular employee. Are you looking to hurt that employee, or are you looking to bring him back into the fold? If you understand what your own motives are, you'll have a better idea of which way to proceed.
I like that, Russ, because you know what's funny? A lot of good supervisors, when they have that problematic employee, they look to motivate them with goals. They look to try to give them something that they feel they want that person to accomplish just to see if they can change their mindset. That's a good point there. That's a very good point there, Russ. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. That bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. All right, guys, stay safe.